Blood is thicker than water, but money is the ultimate solvent. My family thought they had buried me beneath years of neglect and public humiliation. They didn't realize I was a seed. This is the story of my father's 60th birthday, the night I resurrected myself and buried them. If you look up the Kensington family of Connecticut, you will find a curated facade of old money perfection. You will see my father, Arthur Kensington, hailed as a titan of commercial real estate. You will see my mother, Sylvia Kensington, dripping in pearls, smiling benevolently at charity galas. And you will see my older sister, Beatrice. Beatrice, the golden child. Beatrice, the heir apparent. What you won't see in those glossy magazine spreads is me, Chloe Kensington, the stain on the upholstery, the mistake they spent 2 decades trying to scrub away. Growing up, the hierarchy in our sprawling Greenwich estate was clear. Beatrice was an investment. I was a liability. Beatrice took to ballet, equestrian competitions, and the art of polite, empty conversation like a duck to water. I, on the other hand, was too loud, too opinionated, and fundamentally opposed to the suffocating rules of high society. When I was 10, I took apart an antique grandfather clock to see how the gears worked. Sylvia didn't speak to me for a month. The psychological warfare was relentless, but it was always waged with a sickeningly sweet smile. Sylvia had a way of cutting you down to the bone while making it sound like maternal advice. "Oh, Chloe, darling, are you sure you want to wear that? It makes your shoulders look terribly broad, almost masculine." Or, to her friends, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway, "We just pray Chloe finds a nice, patient man to take care of her. She certainly doesn't have her sister's natural grace." My father was no better. Arthur was a man of balance sheets, and I was perpetually in the red. He enabled my mother's cruelty through his silence, preferring his scotch and his golf clubs to the messy business of parenting a daughter who didn't fit his mold. The breaking point arrived the week after my 21st birthday. I had just graduated magna cum laude with a degree in finance, an achievement that was met with a polite nod from Arthur and a sigh from Sylvia, who lamented that I hadn't pursued art history like Beatrice. The family business, Kensington Real Estate, was secretly navigating a minor crisis. Beatrice, who had been given a vice presidency straight out of college as a vanity title, had wildly mismanaged a multi-million-dollar development project in Boston. She had signed off on fraudulent contractor invoices, bleeding the company dry. Instead of holding Beatrice accountable, my parents orchestrated a masterpiece of gaslighting and scapegoating. Arthur called me into his mahogany-panelled study. Sylvia was sitting on the leather sofa, her face a mask of tragic disappointment. "We know what you did, Chloe," Arthur said, his voice cold and flat. I stared at him. "What I did? I haven't even been in the office." "Do not lie to us," Sylvia snapped, her composure slipping just enough to reveal the venom underneath. "Beatrice told us everything. How you manipulated her passwords. How you authorized those Boston payments to embarrass her. It's sick, Chloe. It is deeply, fundamentally sick. It was a blatant, absurd lie. But Beatrice was crying softly in the corner, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy precision. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a sacrificial lamb to protect the golden child's reputation. When I screamed, when I demanded they look at the IP addresses, the audit trails, Arthur just slammed his fist on the desk. "You are a toxic presence in this family," he roared. "You have always been jealous of your sister. As of today, you are cut off. You will pack your things, and you will leave. You are no longer a part of Kensington Real Estate, and you are no longer a part of this family." I left with a single suitcase and a bank account that held exactly $3,000 of my own saved allowance. The next 5 years were a trial by fire. I moved into a mold-infested shoebox apartment in Astoria, Queens. I ate boiled pasta and worked 3 jobs. A barista at dawn, a data entry clerk by day, and a freelance financial analyst by night. But the anger fueled me. It burned so hot it crystallized into absolute focus. I started a boutique consulting firm under a shell name, Vanguard Holdings. I specialized in identifying distressed real estate assets and restructuring them. I was relentless. I worked 20 hours a day. My breakthrough came when I caught the attention of Jonathan Sterling, a notoriously ruthless but brilliant venture capitalist who saw through my polite emails and recognized the hungry, feral instinct of someone who had nothing to lose. He mentored me, backed me, and taught me how to weaponize my financial acumen. By the time I was 26, Vanguard Holdings wasn't just a boutique firm anymore. We were acquiring commercial blocks in Manhattan. I had amassed a personal net worth that dwarfed my father's entire legacy. But I kept my name out of the press. I operated in the shadows through a labyrinth of LLCs managed by my legal team at Davis & Campbell LLP. To the world, Vanguard's CEO was a phantom. To my family, I was still the disgraced outcast who had probably amounted to nothing. They hadn't checked on me once. Not a single phone call, not a single text, until the invitation arrived. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope delivered by courier to my corporate office. The fact that they had even tracked down a forwarding address, an old P.O. box I kept for junk mail, meant they had gone out of their way. I sat at my desk, looking out over the New York skyline from the penthouse of my headquarters, and broke the wax seal. Sylvia and Arthur Kensington request the honor of your presence to celebrate Arthur's 60th birthday gala. Oakfield Manor, Greenwich. Black tie. A small handwritten note fell out. It was from Beatrice. Chloe, Mother thinks it's time we let bygones be bygones for Dad's special night. I know things have probably been hard for you. Please come. We've even made sure the catering staff knows not to assign you to any tables, so you won't have to feel out of place among our friends. See you there. B. I read the note 3 times. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a snare. Sylvia and Beatrice didn't invite me out of a sudden surge of familial love. They invited me because they needed a contrast. Beatrice was newly engaged to Richard Hastings, a Blue Blood Trust Fund heir. The gala was going to be a dual celebration, Arthur's milestone and Beatrice's triumphant engagement. They wanted me there as the designated failure, the ragged Cinderella to make the wicked stepsisters look better. They wanted to parade me in front of the Greenwich elite, offer faux sympathy for my struggles, and cement the narrative that casting me out was the right decision. I leaned back in my chair and tapped the thick cardstock against my desk. Bad news, boss? I looked up. Standing in the doorway of my office was Declan Hayes. Declan was my head of security, though the title hardly did him justice. He was 32, a former SAS operative who had transitioned into private security after a tour that had left him with a faint, jagged scar down the side of his neck and a demeanor carved from solid ice. He stood 6'3", built like a bank vault, and moved with the unsettling quietness of a predator. I had hired him 3 years ago when Vanguard started making enemies of powerful, less than ethical developers. Over time, Declan had become more than a bodyguard. He was my confidant, my shadow, and the only person who knew the full extent of the Kensington family history. Just an invitation, I said, tossing the card across the desk. Declan walked over, his heavy footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. He picked up the invitation, his sharp grey eyes scanning the elegant script, and then read Beatrice's handwritten note. His jaw tightened. "Are you going to ignore it?" he asked, his deep voice a low rumble. "Or are you going to send them a complimentary fruit basket laced with arsenic?" A slow, dangerous smile crept onto my face. "Neither. I'm going to attend." Declan raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Walking into a snake pit wearing a target isn't standard tactical protocol, Miss Kensington." "It's not a snake pit if you're the mongoose, Declan," I replied, standing up and walking to the floor-to-ceiling window. I knew something my family didn't. Over the past 8 months, Kensington real estate had been secretly hemorrhaging money. The commercial market had shifted, and Arthur had over-leveraged his assets on a massive, doomed waterfront development. To avoid bankruptcy, He had been desperately seeking an equity partner to bail him out. For the last month, Arthur and his lawyers had been in frantic negotiations with a private equity group, begging for an injection of capital. That private equity group was Vanguard Holdings. Arthur had been negotiating with my lawyers. He had no idea the faceless corporate entity holding his financial life in its hands was the daughter he threw away. The final papers for the buyout were scheduled to be signed the Monday after his birthday. "Declan," I said, turning back to him. "Clear my schedule for Saturday evening. Call the tailor and get the fleet ready. We are going to Greenwich." "How much of a statement are we making?" he asked, a faint glint of amusement in his eyes. "All of it. I don't want to just walk in. I want the air to get sucked out of the room." The next few days were a blur of meticulous preparation. I wasn't just getting ready for a party. I was preparing for a war. I flew in a designer from Milan to craft a custom gown. It was a breathtaking piece, midnight blue silk that clung to my frame, structured with razor-sharp elegance, paired with a diamond collar necklace that cost more than Arthur's first mansion. It screamed power. It screamed untouchable. Declan, too, prepared. He usually wore understated, tactical suits. But for this, I had him fitted in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. If he was going to be my shadow, he was going to be the most terrifyingly elegant shadow in Connecticut. Saturday night arrived with a cold, biting wind. I sat in the back of a blacked-out Rolls-Royce Phantom, staring at the passing trees as we crossed the state line into Greenwich. Declan sat across from me, his posture perfect, his eyes constantly scanning the perimeter even from inside the armoured vehicle. 2 black SUVs trailed behind us, carrying the rest of my security detail. "Heart rate?" Declan asked quietly. "Steady." I lied. My chest was tight. The rational part of me knew I held all the cards. I was a billionaire. I was untouchable. But the terrified 21-year-old girl who had been thrown onto the street was still in there somewhere, bracing for the impact of her mother's cruelty. "They have no power over you anymore, Chloe," Declan said. It was rare for him to use my first name. He leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes locking onto mine with absolute certainty. "You built an empire. They built a house of cards. Tonight, you're just showing them the wind." I took a deep breath, the expensive leather of the seat grounding me. "Thank you, Declan." The Rolls-Royce slowed as we approached the wrought-iron gates of Oakfield Manor. The sprawling estate was lit up like a beacon, classical music drifting out over the manicured lawns. Valets were rushing to park a sea of Porsches, Mercedes, and Bentleys. Our convoy pulled into the circular driveway, immediately drawing the attention of the valets and the guests lingering near the grand entrance. The sheer size and imposing nature of the 3-car motorcade made people stop and stare. The Phantom eased to a halt right at the red carpet. Declan stepped out first. He adjusted his cuffs, his presence instantly dominating the space. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like a highly expensive, highly lethal asset. The valet rushed forward, but Declan held up a single, commanding hand, stopping the boy in his tracks. Declan walked around to my side and opened the door, offering his hand. I placed my hand in his and stepped out into the crisp night air. The flash of the valet's wide eyes told me everything I needed to know. I smoothed the midnight blue silk of my gown, adjusted my posture until my spine was steel, and looked up at the towering oak doors of the manor. Inside that room was the family that had discarded me. Inside was the trap they had set. "Ready, boss?" Declan murmured, stepping just a half pace behind my right shoulder. "Let's go greet the family," I whispered. And together, we walked up the steps to face the fire. Stepping through the massive oak doors of Oakfield Manor was like stepping into a perfectly preserved museum of my childhood trauma. The grand foyer, with its sweeping double staircase, and the enormous baccarat crystal chandelier that Sylvia had imported from Paris, was exactly as suffocating as I remembered. The air was thick with the scent of Casablanca lilies, my mother's favourite, and the expensive, heady perfumes of Connecticut's elite. The low hum of chamber music and polite, networking chatter drifted from the main ballroom. For a fleeting second, the familiar knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. The 21-year-old girl who had been cast out into the cold was screaming to turn around and run back to the safety of the Rolls-Royce. But then I felt the subtle, solid presence of Declan at my right shoulder. He didn't say a word, but the sheer, unwavering stillness of him anchored me. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was Vanguard Holdings. We moved past the coat check, my midnight blue silk gown trailing elegantly against the marble floor. As we entered the main ballroom, the effect was immediate. High society operates on a very specific frequency of gossip, and the Kensington family's disgraced younger daughter was a legendary cautionary tale in these circles. People who hadn't seen me in 5 years, who expected me to look haggard, defeated, perhaps dressed in an ill-fitting rental, suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Eyes darted. Champagne flutes paused halfway to perfectly glossed lips. I didn't shrink. I kept my chin parallel to the floor, my expression serene and detached. I let them look. I let them take in the custom Italian silk, the blinding clarity of the diamond collar resting against my collarbone, and the terrifyingly imposing figure of my bodyguard, who was currently scanning the room with the clinical detachment of a sniper evaluating targets. Well, I honestly didn't think you had the nerve. The voice was coated in honey, but the underlying razor was unmistakable. I turned to see my sister Beatrice gliding toward me. She wore a champagne-coloured Oscar de la Renta gown that washed out her complexion, but she carried herself with the smug radiance of a woman who believed she owned the world. Hanging off her arm was a tall, conventionally handsome man with the soft jawline of someone who had never worked a hard day in his life, Richard Hastings. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Congratulations on the engagement." Beatrice's eyes raked over me, searching for a flaw, a frayed hem, a sign of cheapness. Finding none, her smile tightened infinitesimally. "Thank you, Chloe. I must admit, Mother and I were worried about where to seat you. We didn't want you to feel overwhelmed among our established friends. But it seems you found a plus one to keep you company." She shot a dismissive, haughty glance at Declan. Though black tie usually implies a certain pedigree. Darling, not hired muscle. "Are you dating a bouncer now?" Declan didn't even blink. He simply looked down at Beatrice with a gaze so intensely cold and devoid of respect that she actually took a half-step backward, her bravado faltering. "Declan is my head of security," I said smoothly, enjoying the brief flash of confusion on my sister's face. "And he's here because my current tax bracket requires a certain level of risk management, something Kensington real estate seems to be struggling with lately, if the industry rumours are true." Beatrice's champagne-coloured complexion went pale. She opened her mouth to snap back, but Richard Hastings intervened, laughing nervously and extending a hand to me. "Richard Hastings," he said, trying to diffuse the sudden, electric tension. "You must be the elusive Chloe. Beatrice has told me. Well, she's mentioned you." I didn't take his hand. I just looked at it, then up at his flushed face. "I'm sure the stories were entirely objective. Richard, welcome to the family. You're going to need a very good accountant." Before he could process the threat disguised as advice, a sharp, commanding voice sliced through the air. "Chloe." I turned. Standing a few feet away were my parents. Arthur Kensington looked older, the stress of his hidden financial ruin etching deep lines around his mouth, though his tuxedo was perfectly tailored. Beside him stood Sylvia, looking like an ice queen holding court. Her gaze locked onto mine, and the sheer volume of contempt in her eyes was breathtaking. "Mother, Father, happy birthday," I said, the words tasting like ash, though I kept my tone light, almost bored. Arthur practically scowled, glancing nervously around to see who was watching. "You're making a spectacle, Chloe. Who is this man?" he demanded, gesturing toward Declan. "A necessary precaution," I replied. Sylvia stepped forward, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper intended only for my ears. "You have a lot of nerve coming here dressed like a high-class escort, trying to upstage your sister on her special night. I don't know whose credit card you maxed out to rent that dress and hire that thug." but you will sit quietly in the back. You will eat your dinner, and you will leave before the dancing starts. Do you understand me?" The raw cruelty of her words, delivered with a polite, frozen smile for the benefit of the onlookers, would have crushed me 5 years ago. Now, it just felt pathetic. They were drowning, and they didn't even realize the water was rising. "I wouldn't miss the speeches for the world, Mother," I whispered back, matching her fake smile. "I have a feeling tonight is going to be incredibly memorable." I turned on my heel and walked away, Declan falling perfectly into step behind me. As we navigated toward the bar, I could feel the burning glares of my family tracking my every move. "You handled that well," Declan murmured, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Heart rate? Fine," I breathed, taking a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. "But the appetizer is over. They're going to try to execute me during the toasts. Sylvia can't help herself." "Let them try," Declan said, his voice a dark, reassuring promise. "The trap is set. We just wait for them to pull the lever." Dinner was a masterclass in psychological isolation. True to her word, Sylvia had seated me at a small, cramped table in the far back corner of the grand ballroom, squeezed between Arthur's ancient, half-deaf great-aunt and a pair of mid-level logistics managers from the company who looked terrified to be seen speaking to me. Declan stood stoically against the wall a few yards away, a silent sentinel watching the room. I didn't touch the poached salmon. I simply sat, sipping my water, watching the high table at the front of the room. Arthur, Sylvia, Beatrice, and Richard sat elevated above the rest of the guests, laughing, toasting, and playing the perfect American aristocracy. As the dessert plates were cleared, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the main stage, and Arthur took the microphone. He spoke for 10 minutes, a booming, arrogant speech about his legacy, the strength of Kensington real estate, and how he had built an empire of concrete and steel that would last for generations. It was a spectacular performance of fiction, considering I knew exactly how close to bankruptcy his empire truly was. Then, it was Sylvia's turn. She glided to the microphone, her diamond earrings catching the spotlight. The room fell into a respectful, rapt silence. She began by praising Arthur, then seamlessly transitioned to Beatrice, speaking of her brilliance, her unwavering loyalty to the family business, and her perfect match in Richard. And then, the tone shifted. Sylvia's eyes scanned the room, bypassing the front tables, looking straight toward the dark corner where I sat. "Family is the foundation of everything we do," Sylvia's voice echoed through the speakers, dripping with manufactured sorrow. "But sometimes, a tree must be pruned so that the healthy branches may thrive. Many of you know that Arthur and I have faced the quiet, agonizing heartbreak of a troubled child. A child who rejected our values, who attempted to sabotage her own sister out of bitter jealousy, and who chose a path of deceit." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was unprecedented. You did not air dirty laundry at a Greenwich gala, but Sylvia was banking on shock value. She wanted to destroy me so utterly that my presence tonight would be viewed as a pathetic, desperate plea for attention. "We invited Chloe here tonight in the spirit of Christian forgiveness," Sylvia continued, her voice trembling with fake emotion, hoping she had found humility. "But seeing her parade into this room, draped in rented finery, completely unrepentant, it breaks a mother's heart. Let this be clear to our friends, our colleagues, and to Richard's wonderful family. Beatrice is our only true daughter. As for Chloe," Sylvia paused, letting the silence stretch, twisting the knife. "She is dead to us. She has been for 5 years, and she will never, ever be a part of the Kensington legacy." The silence in the ballroom was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Several people turned in their chairs to stare at me, their faces masks of pity, horror, or morbid fascination. Up at the high table, Beatrice was dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the devastated sister to perfection. Arthur looked grim and resolute. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap, were not shaking. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. The 21-year-old girl was officially dead. The billionaire sitting in her chair was ready to go to work. Before the uncomfortable murmurs could begin, a heavy, authoritative sound cut through the silence. Clap, clap, clap. It was Declan. He pushed off the wall and walked slowly, deliberately, down the center aisle of the ballroom. His slow, mocking applause echoed like gunshots in the quiet room. Every eye in the house snapped to the massive, scarred man in the Tom Ford tuxedo. A beautiful performance. Mrs. Kensington. Declan's deep, commanding voice rolled over the crowd. He didn't need a microphone. His voice had the carrying power of a military commander. Truly Shakespearean. But unfortunately, your financial disclosures are severely lacking. Security! Arthur roared into the microphone, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Get that thug out of my house! 2 of Oakfield Manor's hired guards rushed forward, but Declan simply stopped, squared his shoulders, and levelled a glare so terrifying that the 2 men froze in their tracks, unwilling to engage. Declan reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. He walked right up to my table, ignoring the hundreds of staring guests, and placed the envelope gently in front of me. The final signed documents from Davis and Campbell LLP. Miss Kensington, Declan said loudly, ensuring the entire room heard him. The wire transfers cleared an hour ago. The acquisition is complete. I stood up. I picked up the envelope and stepped out from behind the small table. The room parted for me as I walked slowly down the center aisle, closing the distance between my dark corner and the brightly lit stage. Arthur was gripping the podium, his knuckles white. Sylvia looked confused, her perfect mask slipping. Beatrice had stopped fake crying. I stopped at the base of the stage, looking up at the people who had tried to bury me. You see, Mother, I started, my voice clear, carrying effortlessly through the dead silent ballroom. You're right about one thing. I have no part in the Kensington legacy, because as of 8 p.m. tonight, the Kensington legacy no longer exists. Arthur let out a bark of nervous laughter. What is this nonsense, Chloe? Are you drunk? Leave this house immediately. I unsealed the envelope and pulled out the crisp, watermarked legal documents. For the past month, Arthur, you've been begging a private equity firm to save you from bankruptcy, I said, my voice ringing with cold, hard authority. You over-leveraged the waterfront project. You hid the losses from your investors, and you were 2 weeks away from federal indictments. You signed over 62% of Kensington Real Estate's voting shares to Vanguard Holdings in exchange for a capital bailout. Arthur's face drained of colour. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. How? How do you know about Vanguard? That's strictly confidential. You have no... I don't just know about Vanguard Holdings, Father, I interrupted, staring dead into his terrified eyes. I am Vanguard Holdings. I founded it 5 years ago in a mouldy apartment in Queens after you threw me out to cover up Beatrice's embezzlement. The collective gasp from the crowd this time wasn't shock. It was absolute scandalized horror. I heard Richard Hastings loudly say, "Embezzlement," to a hyperventilating Beatrice. I am the CEO, Arthur, I continued, my voice merciless. I own your debt. I own your assets. I own the chair you are sitting in, the company car you drove here in. And as of this morning, Vanguard Holdings legally acquired the deed to Oakfield Manor. You don't own this house anymore. I do. Sylvia gripped the edge of the table, her legs giving out slightly, forcing Arthur to catch her arm. You're lying, she gasped, her voice shrill and broken. You're a wicked, lying little girl. Read the signature on the buyout agreement you signed yesterday. Arthur, I commanded, tossing the heavy packet of documents onto the stage at his feet. Arthur's trembling hands picked up the paper. He flipped to the last page. I watched his eyes scan the ink. I watched his soul leave his body as he saw the name Chloe Kensington, CEO, Vanguard Holdings, LLC, printed beneath the signature line. You, Arthur whispered into the microphone, the word broadcasting his utter defeat to the entire Greenwich elite. You bought us. No, Arthur, I replied, turning my back on them to face the stunned, silent crowd. I foreclosed on you. Blood might be thicker than water, but it doesn't pay the mortgage. I looked back over my shoulder one last time, meeting my mother's terrified, tear-filled eyes. You were right, Sylvia. The troubled branches have been pruned. Please have your things packed and vacated from my property by Monday morning. The fallout was instantaneous. A spectacular implosion of high society grace. The moment the heavy oak doors of the ballroom closed behind Declan and me, the orchestrated perfection of Arthur's 60th birthday gala shattered. Through my network, I received a minute-by-minute account of the ensuing chaos. Richard Hastings did exactly what a man bred for self-preservation would do. The Hastings family wealth was managed by the notoriously conservative wealth management division at J.P. Morgan, and they possessed an absolute zero-tolerance policy for public scandal. The moment the word embezzlement left my lips, Richard physically backed away from Beatrice. He didn't wait for an explanation. He didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. In front of 300 of Connecticut's most influential people, Richard slipped the 4-carat Tiffany engagement ring off Beatrice's trembling finger, placed it coldly on the white linen tablecloth, and walked out of the manor without a single backward glance. Beatrice's hysterical, echoing sobs were the only soundtrack, as the rest of the guests stampeded for the valet, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive wreckage of the Kensington family. By Monday morning at 8 a.m., the true agonizing reality of their situation descended upon them. I did not send a junior associate to handle the eviction. I went myself. A fleet of black Vanguard Holdings SUVs pulled up the winding driveway of Oakfield Manor, followed closely by 3 heavy-duty moving trucks, and a team from Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher and Flom, one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in New York City, retained specifically by me to execute the liquidation. When Declan pushed open the front doors, the house was a disaster zone. The remnants of the gala, stale champagne, wilted lilies, and half-eaten caviar still littered the reception rooms. Sylvia was in the grand foyer, frantically trying to stuff a velvet pouch filled with Cartier watches and diamond tennis bracelets into a Louis Vuitton duffel bag. She looked ragged. Her perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, and the terrifyingly arrogant gleam in her eyes had been replaced by the frantic, darting panic of a cornered animal. "Put it down, Sylvia," I said. My voice echoed off the marble floors. She froze, clutching the velvet pouch to her chest. "These are mine! These were gifts, purchased with company funds during a period of gross insolvency," stated Elias Thorne, my lead attorney from Skadden, stepping out from behind me, "which makes them corporate assets subject to seizure by Vanguard Holdings. If you leave this property with a single piece of jewelry, Mrs. Kensington, I will have the Greenwich police arrest you for grand larceny before you reach the front gates." Declan stepped forward, silently holding out a large, heavy-duty plastic evidence bin. Sylvia stared at him, her lips trembling with impotent rage, before she dropped the velvet pouch into the plastic bin. The dull thud sounded like a gavel falling. Arthur was sitting in his mahogany-panelled study, staring blankly at the wall. He hadn't slept. His tuxedo shirt was unbuttoned, and he looked 20 years older. When I walked in, he didn't even have the energy to muster his usual bluster. "Where are we supposed to go, Chloe?" he asked, his voice a hollow, raspy whisper. "My accounts at Goldman Sachs. They're frozen. The company credit cards are declining. I have $32 in my wallet." "I suggest a motel in Stamford," I replied smoothly, leaning against the doorframe. "It's what I could afford 5 years ago, when you threw me onto the street. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your personal, non-luxury clothing. The moving crew will handle the rest." The karma that hit the Kensington family over the next 6 months was not just hard. It was a total, microscopic dismantling of their lives, playing out in the unforgiving theatre of the real world. Arthur's desperate attempts to hide his financial decay caught the attention of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC launched a full-scale federal investigation into Kensington Real Estate's books. Facing multiple counts of wire fraud and defrauding investors, Arthur was forced into a humiliating public settlement. To avoid federal prison time, he was barred from ever acting as a director or officer of a public company again. Stripped of his country club memberships and his identity, he took a job managing a mid-tier storage facility in New Jersey, spending his days driving a golf cart around corrugated metal units. Sylvia's downfall was entirely social, which for her was a fate worse than death. Stripped of her wealth, her charities, and her manor, she became a pariah. The women she had sipped tea with wouldn't even return her phone calls. She was forced to move into a cramped, noisy one-bedroom apartment over a dry cleaner in Queens, ironically. Just 3 blocks away from the mouldy shoebox I had lived in when they disowned me. Without her staff to clean, cook, or tailor her life, she aged rapidly, a bitter, ghost-like woman complaining to the local grocer about how she used to wear Hermes. But the most severe justice was reserved for Beatrice. During the audit of Kensington Real Estate, Vanguard's forensic accountants compiled a massive, airtight dossier proving Beatrice's embezzlement from the Boston project, the very crime she had pinned on me. I didn't keep it quiet. I handed the dossier directly to the district attorney's office in the Southern District of New York. Beatrice was arrested on a Tuesday. The tabloids had a field day publishing her mugshot no makeup, eyes red and swollen, looking absolutely nothing like the golden child of Greenwich. Faced with overwhelming digital evidence, she took a plea deal to avoid a 10-year sentence. She was sentenced to 5 years of severe probation, ordered to pay millions in restitution she didn't have, and mandated to complete 3,000 hours of community service. Because she was a convicted felon with a record of severe financial fraud, no corporate entity would hire her. The heiress who used to sneer at waitstaff was forced to take a minimum wage job working the graveyard shift at a 2 4-hour diner off Interstate 95, scrubbing grease off griddles and pouring coffee for tired truckers to pay off her court-mandated debts. As for me, I watched the ashes of their empire scatter from the penthouse of Vanguard Holdings. I didn't feel petty joy, just a profound, cleansing sense of closure. The ghost of the terrified 21-year-old was finally laid to rest. The business grew exponentially. Vanguard acquired the remaining viable assets of Kensington Real Estate, restructuring them into profitable, ethical housing developments. And somewhere along the way, the professional boundary between my fiercely loyal head of security and myself began to blur into something deeper. Late nights reviewing contracts turned into quiet dinners, and Declan's protective presence evolved into a quiet, steadfast love that I had never experienced in my own home. I had lost a family of vipers, but I had built an empire of wolves. They thought burying me in the dirt would be the end of my story. They forgot I was a seed. Today, Vanguard Holdings stands as a testament to survival. While the Kensington name is nothing but a cautionary tale whispered among the Greenwich elite, family is a title earned through loyalty, not demanded by blood. I didn't just rebuild my life from their ashes. I became the unstoppable, raging fire.